Alright, you want to be on camera?
No.
Alright, we're doing Pistons today.
I told you.
Hey guys, welcome back. We're gonna be what we're going to be doing today is gapping the piston rings using the new bore here and the piston rings that they sent. This process is probably one of the more time-consuming processes there are in this engine build. At least for me, I don't have the the gapping tools that a lot of, if you build engines all the time, you might have that little wheel that scrapes off the rings for you, but I don't have that. I'm just using a regular old file. So it takes a little bit longer. I have to keep checking. And literally with these rings, we're talking about a thousandth of an inch difference between a good gap and not so much of a good gap. I'm getting it as close as I can, and based on what I'm reading is, the closest I can get to the correct gap. So I'm going to pull these rings out here, take a look at them. So it comes with some instructions. Basically, these instructions are to help you understand how big the gap should be. Although they list a number of gaps here, I'm really guessing as to which ones I should be using. So best guess, I came out to about 0.8, 0.8 for the top and 0.2 for the bottom ring. I don't know if I said that right. The oil gaps are fine. I've already checked a whole bunch of these there. It's just a really long, tedious process of gapping these rings. Luckily there's only 6. I feel bad for folks that are doing a 12-cylinder or an 8-cylinder even. So when we talk about cylinder gaps and rings, we're talking about basically 3 sets of rings. If you can see all these in the camera correctly, but this goes in one place. It's actually 3 separate components. This is the oiler. The gapping and the spacing on this is less important. It just has to be not terribly off, and these seem fine for this bore. These two are a little bit tougher. Honestly, plan on spending like the whole day doing this piece of the thing. I'll show you in a second how long this takes. But yeah, you're trying to shave 1/1000th of an inch off of these gap ends to get all the way down to where you're going. And I'll kind of show you the technique that I was using. The reason why it took so long is because everything I read said this is extremely important, getting these gaps well placed for the pistons. especially the top ring. Now, I'm not totally sure if I have the right one, so I hate to go back and do these all again, but I think I have the right gap at 0.08, 0.018. The other tool we're going to be using here is these feeler gauges. Yeah, that's what they're called, feeler gauges. These are little markings at the top of the gauge, and they have a thickness. So as you get and try out your ring, these thicknesses are all the different sort of thicknesses you need to gap this, the different rings on here, because the different rings take different gaps. The other kind of tool I've been using, this is the piston off the previous build, the one I pulled apart. Obviously we're replacing these pistons, but this is a handy little doodad to even out your rings as they go into the bore here. You probably won't be able to see very well on camera, but yeah, this is the old piston. You can see 1, 2, 3 rings, and if I can get close to the camera here. Bottom ring is that oil ring. Gapping isn't so terribly important on that, but these other rings are the one that prevent blow-by and scrape the oil from the sides of the cylinders, and keep the compression ratio correct. Well, the air compression. But this is just doing double duty here because I'm using it to square out the rings in the block, because that's easy. A couple other things. So first thing you want to do, obviously, clean out your cylinders. I put a little bit of oil in there just to make the rings slide in and out easier. Just felt weird to be doing this dry, and just put a tiny bit of oil in there. So to get the rings to seat inside the bore here, you just kind of hold them together and push them in. Once you figure out the technique, it's pretty easy. Or the feel of it. So once you square up the rings there, you're going to take a quick reading. Now this is with no shaving whatsoever. We haven't. This is fresh out of the box, so that I kind of already know what the gap of this one is after doing it a bunch of times. It's kind of riding around the 12, the 0.012 range. That's where it needs. That's where it is right now. 0.012 needs to go all the way up to 0.018. So basically, we're going to be taking off 6/1000th of an inch from the rings here. So that's the top ring. I recommend doing the top ring last. Start off with the second ring. The second ring is a tiny bit more forgiving, meaning the second ring's gap, while important, if it's off by a couple 1/1000ths of an inch, it's not going to matter as much from what I can tell. Obviously you don't want it off by large gaps. And another thing you want to keep conscious of when I show you here what I use, So I'm using this file here. I'm only filing down one end of the piston ring, and I'm keeping the others untouched so that while you're filing it down, you can maybe see here on the light. I have a light here, and when I'm filing it down, I push the two pieces together. See if you can see it here. Push these two pieces together, and basically you should see no air in between there. That means that the sides are perpendicular to the cylinder. You do not want any sort of taper going on there. That does strange things to the exhaust and compression gases. So you want to keep that as flat as possible. What happens is when it expands, it gets even closer, and that little tiny bit of gap is important when the engine is firing. Evidently super important, from everything I read. It's very important to keep that there. A couple other notes here. You won't be able to see it, but each ring is marked with a number on the top. So this indicates that that's the top of the ring. It's very important to seat the ring in the order in which they go, also with the numbers facing up. That indicates that this should be the top of the ring. Now, this top ring, you'll notice, let's see if you can get a better close-up of that and get some reflection off the light. Looks like it has kind of a copper coating to it. Top ring obviously takes the most heat, and I don't know if you can, it's really hard to see, but there is a coating on the end, the very outer edge, obviously put there purposely to handle this particular aluminum block. It's coated in Nickel, so the coatings around the rings will change based on what kind of engine you're working on. And the other thing that changes is the tapers around the edges. This is a whole, piston ring science is a whole thing, right? It's how to put the taper on the sides, stuff I don't know about. All I know is I'm gonna try and get the shave off 6/1000ths of an inch, and see if I can get it on there. It sounds easier than it is. It really did take me all day to kind of basically file it down, put it back in the block, measure it, pull it out, file it down again, put it back in the block. Because filing it down is not an exact science at all. The other thing I did was, on the side that I'm filing it down, this isn't a paint marker or anything, it's just a regular Sharpie. So it leaves a very fine little tiny mark there. This helps when you're holding it against the light and kind of as you're going along, to me anyway. It was much easier to see if I was making progress on the file or it wasn't doing anything. Just by judging how much of the little mark was left. You really need to, obviously, 6/100,000ths of an inch. It's really easy to go over, and if you go too far over, the only fix is to go get new piston rings. That's it. If you go too far, you gotta get new piston rings. And if you don't go far enough, the pistons will expand and hit the gap and will close it entirely and start scraping against the side of the walls damaging the new cylinders you just honed and put casings in. So lot riding on the size of that gap there. Well, anyway, let's get to it. That's a lot of talking. We're gonna just probably speed through some of this, but yeah, this is it. This is the exciting part of Asia. And you want to stop occasionally and kind of hold it over a light. See, I just noticed that there's a taper to the sides, and I don't know if you can even see that on the camera, but the side of the ring is not abutting the other side evenly. So there's an outward taper to it. So you just go back and file it down the right direction, and then what you don't want is to keep that taper there. So you got to stop and check every so often. Again, using one of those gap ring wheels, they were about $100. Definitely worth it in terms of time savings. Kind of wish I got one. This is a long, tedious, inexact science for sure. It certainly has a lot riding on it. Occasionally you gotta get the filings out. Because the file will stop working. Sounds good. The only thing left to do now that the gap is set correctly is to come back with some really fine grit sandpaper, or really fine or whetstone, and get the rough edges off the sides that we just filed down. Once that's done, these are ready to go. Ready to go on the piston, assuming I've gapped it properly. This ring, it's made out of some composite, which is funny. This ring is a lot thicker and heavier, but this ring is harder to file. My guess is they wanted to, they made it out of some composite that's just a little more tougher because that's it. Right on target. And that's it. That's all there is to gapping the pistons, but honestly that took me all day. Because when you're first starting out, unlike now, I'm kind of speeding it up because I've already done this 5 times. But that's the procedure you repeat. File a teeny bit, put it back in there, see if it works. Keep going to the next one. All right, we're gonna move on to the next step. And that's it, thanks. Under the engine. And we're gonna be putting a few bolts in to hold that carrier in so that we can flip it upside down and put the pistons in. We're also going to be using a special Porsche tool, the 2613, which I just crafted out of wood. Saved myself $45 on a Porsche tool, which, thank you. Just a dowel with a hole drilled through it, and we'll show you where that goes. But right now we're going to be putting in the permanent bolts for the crankcase carrier. That has to be done while the engine is this way, or else the crankcase carrier will fall out once we flip it over to the other side. So, one of these bolts has a gasket because it goes on the outside. And then we're just gonna put a little grease on there. Which is just reusing a cylinder head bolt to basically bolt the crankcase. This is just a spacer for where the head is. And we'll slip a washer on there. So it doesn't bite too much into the wood. So that's how that looks. That goes in this end here to basically bolt. So now crankcase is held in place. Now we can put the number 1 through 3 cylinders pistons in. Bolt them down to the connecting rod. Once we're done with that, we can flip it back over and put the other case half on. And then the fun begins. All right. Alright, you want to be on camera?
No.
Alright, we're doing pistons today.
Hi, cool.
Pistons are in. Spin it here. Looks good. We're gonna flip it back over and